and today we're going to be discussing drought-tolerant gardening. And while I was working on this, my husband asked me, what my topic was, and when I told him it was drought-tolerant gardening, he kind of got this funny look on his face and looked at me and said, "Well, is that really relevant to this area?" And I think he may not be alone in thinking that with all the rain that we get around here, that it isn't a relevant topic, but it is because Western Washington has a Mediterranean type climate. We average, 40 to 50 inches of rainfall a year, and only a couple of inches of that happens during the summer months, the mid-June to mid-September. So we go from, feast to famine in terms of water. Today, I'm going to be covering a few areas. I'm going to covering some general concepts related to dealing with the drought conditions, and then talk about some of the plants that can deal with it more successfully. And it's, first, it's always good to start talking about soil because that's imperative to the success of any garden. And I'll also be covering some brief information on irrigation and planting in the garden, and then hopefully spending the majority of the time talking about the fun stuff, which is plants. So in order to have a successful drought-tolerant garden, it's really vital to have healthy soil with good soil structure that allows the soil to be infiltrated and to hold the water. In the winter months, the soil should be absorbing the high rates of water, minimizing the runoff and soil erosion, and it will also be trapping the sediments and excess nutrients, all the while supporting all those great little microbes, the bacteria and fungi, along with earthworms. And those little critters, most of which you can't see, really help the soil and plants be healthy by fighting pests and diseases. Now, if your soil is compacted, it's not going to absorb water. So you want to make sure that you take a look at the soil on your property and see if and where it's compacted, and then take steps to amend that. So you'll want to amend that with compost, and at the get-go, you may have to rototill that in to kind of loosen the soil up. But I want to caution you about rototilling. You only want to do that one time or as minimally as possible, because the more you disrupt the soil, the more you are going to disrupt all those great little microbes and earthworms and that happy little home that they have down there. And you'll actually be degrading the soil health by rototilling. So in terms of, so after you get your soil, fluffier, then on an annual basis, you might want to put compost down and just leave it there and let it do its thing kind of naturally, letting the healthy aspects of it kind of go down into the soil over time as opposed to quickly. The last thing I'll talk about here is mulch. And mulch really helps to keep the soil temperature lower. It reduces evaporation, it helps reduce runoff, and it also inhibits weed germination. So when mulch is applied at the appropriate level, it can reduce evaporation by as much as 75%. And you may be asking, okay, well, what's the appropriate level? Well, on a fine to medium bark, you want to put a 1 to 2 inch layer of mulch. If you've got arborist wood chips or the larger nuggets of bark, you want to go 2 to 3 inches. And it's also the best time to put mulch down is kind of late winter, early spring, when the soil has all the water absorbed into it. So you want to keep that water in there from evaporating. And it also is the best time to help kind of limit that weed seed germination. So as I was researching this presentation, it became apparent that there are really 3 E's in irrigation: easy, effective, and efficient. And water is easy to take for granted in our country. Water flows from our faucets at the touch of a lever or a twist of a hose bib. And it's the most precious resource in the world, and it gushes into our homes like magic. So we tend to kind of take it for granted, and we've kind of moved towards irrigation being easy and effective, when in fact we really need to work on it being efficient and effective, you know, with easy being perhaps a little lower down the list. Our ancestors probably had to hand carry it, either pump the well, or, you know, carry it in buckets from water sources, you know, so they learned how to make it more efficient while being effective, because by doing so, it actually made it less work for them. They wouldn't have to go down so many times. So you can learn by going back in time on some of the tricks that they perhaps learned. And most of us are using more water than we need. And so it's also impacting, you know, water bills and such. So, you know, it's a good time to re-examine our irrigation. So we may want to take a look at our own irrigation systems and see where improvements can be made. Now, irrigation is one area where going low is probably a good thing. So by going low, I mean, you know, looking at drip lines or soaker hoses, getting that water closer to where it's actually needed. And where it's actually needed is in the roots. You know, the leaves don't need it. In fact, it's generally not a great idea to water leaves and trunks and all that. It's just kind of wasting water. There are some, you know, some interesting and simple solutions. There's a book by a fellow by the name of David A. Bainbridge, and it's called Gardening with Less Water. And it offers some really, you know, interesting, simple DIY solutions. And there's clay pots or olives. There's different uses of soaker hoses and wicks. And you can get the book at the Timberland Library. It's really a very interesting read and provides a number of interesting solutions to irrigation. Another aspect, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking, but I've listed some resources here, is rainwater harvesting. You know, rainwater is kind of like liquid money. It's available for free, and if you store it up, you can use it to water during the dry spells. There are 3 Western Washington Master Gardener groups that have information available: Whatcom County Master Gardeners, Clark County Master Gardeners, and Skagit County. So take a look at their information if you're interested in either utilizing a purchased rainwater harvesting system or making your own. The one caveat, if you're using a rain barrel that's coming off a roof, you probably don't want to use that for vegetable gardening, because the roof water carries toxins like zinc and lead. So best to use that for just landscaping, unless you want to take specific steps, and more information about that is in the materials there. Okay, in terms of planning a drought-tolerant garden, you want to plan the design so that your plants are grouped in zones based upon their water usage. It's really kind of a follow-on to the basic tenet of right plant, right place. By grouping the plants, you are not overwatering some plants and underwatering some. You're giving those plants the amount of water that they need without wasting water. And you want to group it into kind of high, moderate, and low water use. And in grouping the high water use, some of the plants that would be considered high water use are annuals, vegetable gardens, and lawns. In the moderate water use, you've got, you know, a number of shrubs and your herbaceous perennials. And then the low water usage will be some of the plants I'm talking about today, along with native plants. If you're lucky enough to have native plants on your property, you kind of already know that they don't require a lot of extra water usage. Another trick is that you want to have your high water usage plants located closer to the house or located closer to your water source to make it just a little bit easier to get the water there. The other thing I want to talk about in terms of planning the garden, if your property has slopes on it, be mindful that they tend to shed water more quickly and are therefore drier because, well, gravity. I mean, you know, water flows downhill. So you want to either consider terracing the slope or putting in low water usage, you know, perhaps ground covers on that hill. And you want to think of terracing as kind of creating giant steps, you know, going up the hill. And what it does is it creates flat surfaces that allow rain and irrigation. It allows them time to soak in rather than running straight down the hill. And another benefit of terracing, if done, you know, such that it can create a more usable space in your yard. It can take that slope and turn it into a more, you know, hospitable space to hang out in. So what is a drought-tolerant plant? Well, horticulturists define drought-tolerant plants as those that can withstand a moderate period of limited moisture. And while they may not prefer periods of hot, dry weather, they can withstand them, meaning they're not going to die. Now, that should probably be caveated because it should state that established drought-tolerant plants can withstand the periods without moisture. You can't pluck a drought-tolerant plant in the ground and the first year think it's going to be drought-tolerant. It needs to be established, meaning it needs to be watered on a regular basis for a year or two so that the roots can establish, and then it will be considered drought-tolerant. And also keep in mind that even drought-tolerant plants will need water in times of extreme temperature, like last year's heat dome in June. They also might need some extra, you know, shading, just like other plants, to be protected. So now, some of the common characteristics of plants that are considered drought-tolerant. You know, some of the things that make them able to tolerate long periods of drought. You know, all plants transpire. They release water from their leaves to cool themselves. And those adapted to grow in dry places have physical traits that minimize the water loss. And these characteristics are common to many drought-tolerant plants. Plants that have gray, silver, or bluish foliage, the leaves provide a reflective surface which deflect the sun's rays so that the plants stay a little cooler and therefore don't need as much water. It's kind of the same concept as having a light-colored car in a sunny, hot area versus a black car. The darker colors retain more heat. And many drought-tolerant plants have smaller, dissected or thin needle-like leaves that, by limiting their surface area, keep evaporation to a minimum and therefore reduce water loss. And on some of these, nature has also created needle-like leaves that are often arranged so that they shade each other from the full force of the sun. Now, a waxy surface to the leaves helps reduce water loss by trapping it within an impermeable coat, and it acts as a sun shield. It's somewhat similar to a glazed pot versus a plain terracotta pot. The glazed pot retains more of the moisture. And then it's kind of fairly obvious that a plant with minimal foliage or spines also has less transpiration. And now lastly, on the hairy leaves, if you look closely at the plants that feel like they're made of wool, they're fuzzy to the touch, you'll see that their tactile coat is made up of fine hairs. And these hairs trap moisture in the air and deliver it back to the plant, as well as limiting moisture loss. So now on to the fun stuff. We're going to start, and I've tried to provide a wide range of plants in various categories, and we'll start with ground covers and grasses. So if you look down at the bottom left, that's Cotoneaster, and you'll see that it's a fairly common plant, but it's a nice low growing plant. It is a spreading shrub. It's evergreen. This particular one is called Queen of Carpets, and it grows only to about 6 inches tall. It does have flowers and berries in the spring, which makes it attractive to both bees and birds. It makes a good ground cover. The other two, the bearberry and the willow leaf, they grow a little bit taller, about 1 foot in height, and are also, really great varieties to use. Going up above that is a plant called the Shenandoah Prairie Switchgrass, and it kind of looks like a Japanese bloodgrass with that red coloration. Now this plant will grow 3 to 4 feet tall. It likes full sun, and it starts off with red on the tips, and throughout the season it becomes redder, and then it will have the pink showy spikes that come up mid-summer, and it will, it's considered evergreen, but in the winter months it kind of goes to that beige color, so you want to cut it back in the spring and let it start over again. To the right of that is blue oatgrass, and it's an evergreen grass, and it has that beautiful blue-green kind of silvery color. It'll grow 2 feet tall. It's also full sun. It is resistant to deer, and it adds a nice kind of architectural touch into a garden. Down below that is a cute little plant that I wasn't really familiar with, but it's so cute that I had to add it. This is called a mouse plant. It is a perennial, it's deciduous, and it's considered spreading, but it doesn't really spread too terribly far. It's not invasive. And in the spring, it will grow those cute little flowers that look like little mice with their long tails. Now, it does die back in the summer, and it's a shade-loving plant, so it can go, under tree canopies and provide some interesting spring interest. A couple of more low growers. Down on the bottom left is the evergreen redwood sorrel, Oxalis oregana, which kind of has a clover look to it. It has pink flowers in the spring. It does well in light to deep shade. You want to make sure that you're getting the evergreen redwood sorrel. There is a deciduous plant, and it is considered to be much more invasive. And it's just a great little plant. Also, keep in mind sedums, and sedums come in a variety of colors as shown here. The purple tepage is up in the left, and the leaves are green with kind of a purple tinge to them. The raspberry red is more green leaf, and then you've got the blue spruce stonecrop. So you've got a variety of sedums that will do very well in this area. And also a plant, it's not actually a sedum, but hens and chicks will do well as also. That's not a sedum, it's actually a sempervivum, but it creates a really nice texture with the varying sizes of rosettes on the plant. So now that we're getting close to spring, I thought it'd be a good idea to talk about some drought-tolerant bulbs. And the bulbs for sun, if you think about bulbs that naturalize, the bulbs that naturalize are the drought-tolerant bulbs. So crocus, which bloom in the spring, and those come, you can get crocus in white, yellow, purple, or purple stripe. There's a really nice purple stripe one that's a little more unusual, and it's called King of the Stripes. These help attract bees early in the season. And are just, easy maintenance. There's also the they also like full sun and are a nice pop of color at the end of the season. Then also down on the bottom right, the grape muscari, or excuse me, the grape hyacinth or muscari. another easy care, and those pair well with daffodils or narcissus up above them to the left of them. And you want to look again for naturalizing narcissus and some of the miniature ones. This one is a tete-a-tete, which is yellow. There's also one called February Gold. There's a jacksnipe, which is white with yellow. Now, if you're interested in some of the larger daffodils, there's a Mount Hood, which is white, and a Saint Cavern, which is yellow. And so just look for naturalizing daffodils and you'll be golden. To the right of that, we think of tulips, the Skagit Tulip Festival, and those that we get at the nurseries or big box stores. Most of those are hybrid tulips, and they don't naturalize particularly well. I can't recall the number of times I've put them in and then taken them back, and it's kind of a pain to get that beauty for the month that they bloom. But if you go for a species tulip, species tulips will come back. They will naturalize. They tend to be a little bit smaller than the hybrid tulips, but they come in a wide variety of colors and different shapes. And in fact, the current edition of Fine Gardening has an article on species tulips. And they are sun-loving. The daffodils and the great muscari, they will tolerate a little bit of shade, but the crocus, the tulips, and then the allium are sun-loving. The allium, which is down the smaller picture on the left, it's in the onion family. That blooms a little bit later. It blooms beginning of summer, end of spring, beginning of summer. And that is known for those big globes of flowers. It's a taller plant. It'll grow about 3 feet tall, some up to 4 feet tall. This particular one is called the Globe Master, and it does very well in our area. There are a couple of bulbs for shade, and those are basically the cyclamens. The cyclamen coum blooms. It's basically blooming, starting to bloom now in my yard. And that comes in, reds, pinks, whites, and a little purpley. And then in the fall, you've got the cyclamen heterofolium, the ivy leaf. And those, I think, tend to be a little bit larger bloom. And those comes in the pinks and the whites, and have both varieties have, interesting foliage, or can have interesting foliage with the variegation. And add interest. But the thing to keep in mind with these, they do die back in the summer months. In the heat of the summer, they will die to the ground, and so there isn't any ground cover. But these are both good under a tree canopy where other things, you have difficulty growing other things. These will grow there. Moving on to some of the drought tolerant perennials. Some of the perennials for sun. Up in the left-hand corner, the Baptisia, also known as a wild indigo, it has kind of the same look as a lupin. It's an upright perennial, and it grows to about 3 feet tall. It flowers in the late spring, early summer, and it attracts bees. Most of the flowering plants will attract bees, so that's a nice alternative to a lupin for drought tolerance. To the right of that is yarrow, or achillea. And this plant, it's an upright semi-evergreen perennial. It grows 2 to 3 feet tall. And you can get this plant in pink, in yellow, white, and also kind of an orangey gold color. And it, I see this growing on the side of the road, so I know that it's drought tolerant. It will do well in both full sun, and it will take a little bit of shade. It also attracts bees and butterflies. It has a nice little landing spot for butterflies with that flat surface. Down below that is a plant that's generally grown more for the foliage, and that's bear's breeches. It does grow those tall, spiky flowers, but it's considered a mounding perennial, semi-evergreen, and it'll grow up to about 2 feet you know, 1.5 to 2 feet tall, but the flowers obviously go up much higher, and they are kind of a sturdy flower. They're not really a delicate flower, but they are, you know, it does flower in the late spring, early summer. And it also attracts bees, and it's resistant to deer. And the plant to the left of that is a blue sea holly, Eryngium, and it's a semi-evergreen perennial. It really likes full sun. You know, kind of the hotter the better. It'll grow up to about close to 2.5 feet tall. It kind of has a thorn-like look, but when it blooms, the blue is almost like an iridescent blue. It's really very attractive. Sometimes it does require some staking. I think the more sun that it gets, the more sturdy the plant is. But it's really an attractive and interesting plant to have in the garden. Now, both the sea holly and the bear's breeches have really long tap roots, and so they are a little bit challenging to try and transplant. So keep that in mind. You probably want to, you know, don't take a plant from a friend because it probably won't do well. Some additional perennials for sun. If you're a lavender lover, go for the Grosso lavender. That tends to have the best drought tolerance of the varieties around here, and it does extremely well. Keep in mind, lavenders require a little bit of work. They need to be pruned every year, otherwise they get woody and kind of get quite ugly. They do attract a lot of bees and have a wonderful scent. But if you don't like that scent and you want kind of a similar look and you don't want to have all the bees there, then the Russian sage is a good alternative for that. It's a deciduous perennial. It will grow up to about 4 feet. It's a little wispier, a little less compact, if you will, as than the lavender, but it provides kind of the same color flowers. And it is also resistant to deer like the lavender is. You'll notice, you know, a lot of these plants, you know, tend to be blues and not as much color variety. So if you're wanting more color variety, one of the things that will bring that is the sun rose. And the sun rose, which is down on the bottom right, it is a spreading perennial. The plant height is about 1 foot high, and bees and butterflies like it. And this you can get in, you know, bright pinks, oranges, yellows, apricot, white. So it provides a little bit more color varieties than some of the other perennials. And it has that gray foliage. And it also, like I said, I think it attracts bees and butterflies. On the bottom left is, and I throw this in here with a little bit of trepidation, it's euphorbia or Mediterranean spurge. Be careful when selecting euphorbias. You want euphorbias that kind of grow in a clumping format. There are some kind of euphorbias that are, you know, like little individuals, and they are pretty invasive, and you'll regret it once you do it. But look for some of the clumping ones. A Humpty Dumpty is a good variety. That's a dwarf Mediterranean. And John Tomlinson, a little bit taller. And, you know, there are some that are more clumping that you'll be happier with. The other thing about euphorbia is you always want to make sure you're wearing gloves when you're pruning it or dealing, you know, weeding around it or what have you. It creates a milky sap that, trust me, I know this from experience, if you get it in your eyes, it is extremely painful. And I know somebody who actually went to the hospital after getting it in their eyes, and it can also irritate the skin. But it is, you know, it provides an interesting texture in the garden, if I haven't scared you off too much. There are fewer perennials for the shade in the drought tolerant category, but some of the hybrid hellebores, I think partially because they bloom now in the raining period, and in the summer, it's more down to those kind of waxy structured leaves, but they are more drought tolerant, as is the red baneberry. And now the red baneberry is an interesting plant. It's a clumping perennial. It will grow to about 2 feet tall, and it has flowers in the spring, some cream flowers, and then it will create these red berries in the summer. And it's attractive to both bees and butterflies. The evergreen Solomon seal down below that is attractive to bees. It does have white flowers in the spring, but I think it's more known for the shape and the foliage. It's kind of a tall plant. It's an evergreen perennial. It will grow to about 1.5 feet, and it really looks lovely in a woodland garden. Now moving on to some of the shrubs. We're going to start with some small shrubs. And the first one is really an interesting shrub. It's called the topiary hebe. It has a really interesting leaf structure. It's an evergreen shrub. It's 4 feet tall, thereabouts, 4 to 5 feet, and it likes full sun. And it just really kind of is a unique plant. You don't see it a lot, and so it's kind of a nice addition. Below that is yucca. It kind of gives more of a tropical feel. It's no surprise that it's drought tolerant. There are a couple of varieties in our area that are quite successful. This one is called Color Guard, and it has the yellow and green variegated leaves. Another one that is kind of more green and cream color is called variegata. These grow to be about 3 feet in height, and they do get flowers in the summer, and it does provide year-round foliage, so it's a good year-round interest plant. It does attract bees and hummingbirds, and it's also deer resistant. And down below is a more common, plant, barberry, but there are a couple of varieties that are they will add color to the garden. They'll add texture. They are deciduous. Most of them have kind of a rounded habit, if you will, growth habit. This one, or actually one I want to talk about is a very small one. It's a dwarf purple leaf Japanese barberry. It grows only to be about 1 foot to 1.5 feet in height, so it's a nice compact barberry. Again, the name is bagatelle, and it does attract bees. Bees are deciduous, so it's not going to be around in the winter months. There's also a variety that is green, that remains green, and that's called Nana, and it only grows to about 2 feet tall. But it does produce some flowers in the spring, and again, attractive to bees. Some additional small shrubs, rosemaries are really easy to grow. They like a little pruning now and again to keep their shape so they don't get kind of too woody or too leggy. Many of the varieties will have beautiful blue blooms in the spring, and it has the added benefit of the culinary aspects of it. And that is a full sun plant. The plant below that is Sarcococa or sweet box. That is a shade loving plant. That likes light, open, or dappled, or deep shade, pretty much any shade. That is a great plant to have by like a front door. It only grows to about 3 feet tall, but in the winter months, it produces the white flowers, and it has a wonderful aroma. And so it's really nice to be in a place where you often travel by, like a front door. So, and it's an easy care plant, doesn't require much attention at all. The plant below it is fairly common in our area, and that's probably for a reason. It's a David's viburnum, and it is considered a spreading evergreen shrub. It grows like 3 to 5 feet. And what's nice about this plant is it really has year-round interest. It likes full sun to part shade, and it will have white flowers in the spring. It has leaves year-round, and the leaves have a little bit of texture on them, which adds some nice interest. And then it has blueberries in the autumn. So you're really getting a year-round plant when you plant this. Moving to some of the larger shrubs, if you're a rose lover and want roses in your yard and you don't have deer, you want to tend towards the old-fashioned shrub roses. They've been around for a long time for a reason. And so you want to tend towards the old-fashioned. This one in particular is called a Hansa, and it's a double pink old-fashioned rose. It's a deciduous shrub, and it will grow 4 to 6 feet and produce those lovely double blooms. And there are a number of old-fashioned shrub roses that are successful in our area at varying heights. You can get some climbing vines that grow up to 30 feet, but you want to look for the old-fashioned shrub roses. To the right of that, large shrub, small tree size, this is the royal purple smoke bush, and it is, when I say a large shrub, it's a large shrub. It's like 15 to 20 feet. And it provides that pop of red tone in the garden. It has interesting foliage. It is deciduous. It does well in both full sun and light shade. And it has this colorful foliage through, from spring through autumn, and it is attractive to bees. Down below that, I want to focus on the Elaeagnus, which is the yellow and green leafed plant, not the rhododendron. And it is an evergreen shrub. It grows 10 to 15 feet in height. This one is called the golden Elaeagnus. There are varieties in our area that are more of the green and cream color, and some solid color leaves as well. And it will do well in any kind of light exposure. It does well in full sun to deep shade. So it's kind of your, all around will do well plant. It is attractive to bees and adds a nice contrast to the larger leaf rhododendron there. The bottom left, you might be familiar with, that's a Ceanothus Victoria, California lilac. It's an upright shrub. It's evergreen. It produces those beautiful blue flowers in the late spring, early summer. It does need full sun. It's great for bees and butterflies and hummingbirds. This plant, you want to give it some light pruning and in early summer, and that will create a denser plant. You'll see plants that are not pruned, they get kind of leggy and they get kind of unattractive over time if they're not pruned, just kind of kept tidy. Some additional large shrubs I want to talk about. The osmanthus, this one is in the behind the words. This is called an Osmanthus variegatus, or a variegated false holly. It's a wonderful plant. It is an evergreen shrub. It will grow up to about 8 feet. It doesn't require any pruning unless you want to shape it. I had to shape this one because it was a kind of incredible way. It is just really easy care and a really lovely plant. It will grow in full sun or light to deep shade. So another kind of all around, conditions type of a plant. In the Osmanthus family, there's also a purple leaf false holly. So if you want more of a purple look, you can go that route. And there are a couple of other Osmanthus that are successful in our area that look, one looks more like an olive plant, olive tree leaf type thing, and it's called a sweet olive. I wasn't going to focus much on native plants today, but up in the upper right, the top there, that's a mock orange, and I'm going to focus on 2 cultivars because they're really spectacular. The first one I want to talk about is called Natchez. Now, the mock orange, which is a Philadelphus plant. It's a deciduous shrub. The mock orange, the Philadelphus lewisi, is a native, but these other cultivars have really spectacular blooms. The Natchez has really, really attractive blooms. It's a sweet smelling plant. It grows to about 5 to 7 feet maybe. It will tolerate some lighter open shade, but it will flower better in full sun. And it's just really, it's a great plant. And if it becomes too leggy, you can chop that back to the ground and it'll regrow. The other variety is the Belle Étoile. It also has lovely flowers. So if you can't find the Natchez, the Belle Étoile is also very nice. The purple leaf 9-bark down below it, that was actually introduced to the area by Dan Hinckley. It was introduced to the US, I should say, through Heron's Wood. This one's called the Diabolo purple leaf 9-bark. It's a deciduous shrub. It'll grow 8 to 12 feet. In the spring, it will get lovely white flowers. It does best in full sun, but it will tolerate light to open shade. And it has really some very attractive purple leaves on it. Like I say, it is deciduous, so the winter doesn't have as much winter interest, but it's a lovely plant. And below that is the pink dawn viburnum. Both the pink dawn viburnum and a Korean spice viburnum do well in our area. The pink dawn viburnum has some beautiful pink flowers in the spring. It's considered a vase-shaped shrub. It grows about 8 to 15 feet. It's a full sun plant, and the flowers are fragrant. And this one also has autumn foliage color, so it does go from spring to fall with interest. And also, this one has a cinnamon colored bark, so even in the winter months, it has a little bit more interest to it. All right, I'm going to cover some trees, and then we'll finish up with conifers. So in looking for some trees that add interest to the garden, the upper left, you see the paperbark maple. And maples, vine maples are native to the area and are very drought tolerant. And the paperbark maple is related to that. It has that wonderful peeling paper look on the tree, which is kind of its characteristic, trademark. But it also has dark summer green leaves, and they will change to kind of a pumpkin orange and brick red if the tree is in full sun. If it's in part shade, they're not quite as vivid, but it's an upright tree. It will grow 18 to 30 feet. It can tolerate some light and even deep shade, but again, the colors won't be as vivid, but it's a very healthy plant and provides year-round interest. To the right of that is the rough bark maple, and you'll notice the leaves don't have the traditional maple shape. And this, while it doesn't have the peeling paper look, the bark is really kind of knobby and has a lot of texture, so it provides winter interest. And the leaves will provide a lovely autumn foliage colors. The apple is an upright tree. It grows 18 to 30 feet. And this one as well will grow full sun to lighter deep shade. And this one, the amount of shade it gets doesn't seem to impact the leaf color in the fall. Going down to the bottom left, ginkgo biloba. This one is called an autumn gold. And when you get a ginkgo biloba, you want to make sure you get a male ginkgo biloba. They come in male and female. The female produce the fruit that have a horrible smell, produce that fruit, and therefore don't have that horrible smell. This is a deciduous tree. It grows 15 to 60 feet. It is a slow growing tree, it has been around for centuries, and it's no surprise that it's drought tolerant just because it's been around for so long. It has, lovely autumn color. It has interesting leaf texture, and very little pruning is needed on this tree. So it's really a nice addition to a garden. To the right of that is a less common tree, and this tree is really widely sought after in many parts of the country, but it doesn't do well other than kind of in the Pacific Northwest, British Columbia, Oregon, and Washington, because we're not susceptible, or this area is not susceptible to fire blight. So this is kind of a silver-leafed, one of the few silver-leafed trees that are available and will be successful in the garden in this area. It's a deciduous tree. It grows 10 to 18 feet, so not an overly tall tree. It does get white flowers. It requires full sun. And a little bit of a caveat, this may not be for the faint of heart, because it does require some pruning unless you want it to go, allow it to go kind of completely wild. If you want it to have some shape to it, it requires pruning, and it probably requires some expert pruning. So, if you're willing to try, that's great. Otherwise, get a professional in. Some of the flowering trees that are drought tolerant in our area, the Yoshino cherry. No surprise if you look at the University of Washington campus, the quad every year, they have the cherry, the quad cam showing the cherry blossoms. And I'm certain that those trees have been around for a long time, and for a long time they didn't have an irrigation system. So very, very successful in our area. They bloom early spring. They will get anywhere from 15 to 25 feet over their life, and they bloom kind of in the mid to late spring. And obviously attractive to birds and bees. To the right of that, crabapple trees. Crabapple trees are a lovely tree to grow in our area. They only grow to 10 to 18 feet, so a smaller tree, and they are most disease resistant in full sun. They have white flowers on them. This particular variety is called Sugar Time, but there are a number of varieties that are successful in our area. And this is also, spring blooming. Down below that is a tree called the Chinese fringe tree, which is a little less common. And this actually blooms in the summer months. It grows 12 to 15 feet tall, so it's not an overly tall tree. It has a rounded habit. It's deciduous. It does best in full sun. And the male tree flowers more heavily than the female, but then the female tree produces attractive clusters of black, bluish berries in the late summer. And so it's really an interesting tree to add to a garden. Now, last but not least, we'll talk a little bit about conifers and some of the conifers that are successful in our area and interesting. On the top picture is a Blue Mountain plum pine. And I picked this one because I kind of get sick of seeing junipers all over the place. And this would be kind of an alternative to a juniper. This one's called a blue gem. It is a spreading conifer. It's evergreen. It grows to about 4 feet tall. It does well in full sun to light or open shade. And it really has an interesting foliage, and it looks great year round. And it, the new growth comes out kind of a bluish, greenish, and then it kind of deepens in tone as the summer progresses. So it's really kind of an interesting a more unique plant to put in a low growing situation. The plant below that is a Japanese umbrella pine, and it's really a cool plant. The needles of this plant kind of resemble the ribs of an umbrella around its stems. It's a very slow growing, and it's not a true pine tree. So it's I'm not even going to attempt Cyadopodus, I believe is how that's pronounced. It grows in light or open shade, very slow growing. In 10 years, it'll be about 7 feet tall. It will grow up to about 30 feet tall over time, but I think that will take quite a long time. It's about 3 feet wide. It will grow to 10 feet wide at maturity, but it's a really lovely plant and provides a lot of interest because it's more unique. Down below is the Hinoki cypress, and there are a couple that I'll mention. Hinoki cypress, they are an evergreen conifer. The dwarf varieties grow anywhere from a foot to like 6 feet. The dwarf Hinoki cypress, Nana, grows to about a foot at 10 years and 2 feet, over the life. So it's a very small mounding plant, very attractive kind of needle structures there. It will do well in full sun or light to dappled shade. There's another variety of a dwarf Hinoki cypress, and it's Nana gracilis, and that one will grow up to 6 feet. So make sure, if you're buying one, make sure you're looking and getting the one that you want, because the names are very similar and oftentimes they get confused. Going to some of the larger conifers, some interesting trees. I love the weeping Alaska yellow cedar. It is a great plant. It's a columnar evergreen conifer, and it will grow between 18 to 35 feet. One of the good things about this plant is it doesn't take up as much space in the garden. It provides a wonderful interest with the weeping and the kind of wonky branches there. It will do well in full sun or light to open shade. To the right of that on top is a Caucasian spruce. And I put that in, you'll see a lot of Colorado blue spruce in the area, and they are beautiful trees when they're healthy. They are susceptible to fungal problems. There's 3 different types of fungal problems. And once they get a bad spot, it ain't coming back. So rather than having that, and also they're very, if you get poked by some of the needles, they're pretty spiky and can be painful. The Caucasian spruce is a large tree. It doesn't have kind of the painful, sharp needles. It is a dark, lustrous green. It doesn't have the blue-green color, but it's a beautiful tree. It's a pyramidal conifer, and it will grow 10 feet at 10 years up to 60 feet. And it's a big tree. And it does well in full sun. Below that is another type of spruce, and that's called Apendula bruns, weeping Serbian spruce. This is another great plant for small spaces. It provides wonderful interest in the garden. It has a strong resistance to insects and diseases. It will grow between 8 and 30 feet, over its lifetime, and doesn't take up, the width at maturity is only about 6 feet. So it's not taking up the space, but it's adding a lot of interest, a lot of bang for the buck. And it is resistant to deer. And it's also, it kind of has, it can get a kind of curvy shape, and it almost looks like a Dr. Seuss tree. And lastly, the Irish yew. If you're looking for a plant, something other than arborvitae for a hedge, the issue, this fastigiata, really interesting needle shape. It's a little bushier than an arborvitae, a little more unusual, and it will do well without a lot of extra water once it's established. It grows 8 to 20 feet, and it can get quite wide. Well, I take that back. It gets about 5 to 6 feet wide, so wider than an arborvitae. It can also be used as a specimen, not in terms of a hedge, but it's a very interesting plant and does well in our area. So hopefully you have some ideas of some drought tolerant plants and some ways to get started on that. And here is a list of some of the resources. Always a good idea if you're interested in plants to go to greatplantpicks.org or landscapeplants.oregonstate.edu. So with that, I'll conclude and take any questions.
All right, thank you.